2019 so far has been an absolutely tremendous year for film. We're reaching its end, and yet there are still so many interesting films to come. The one thing I've noticed in many of the films this year is that they can in many instances feel very nostalgic. That was a compliment, by the way, I don't want you interpreting that wrong. Now, of course, there have been nostalgic films every year. Some of my personal favorites have been films that show a clear love and appreciation to the past. But in my opinion, 2019 has had a strangely large amount of films that seem to really love the past. Now, of course, nostalgia is a very diverse word and can be applied to so many things: a time period, a location, a person, and so many more. We as humans all know the power of nostalgia. When we see an image or listen to a piece of music, or hell, even a specific scent, we can sometimes associate that with something from our past, and many great films can bring about nostalgia. Nostalgia is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful tools in filmmaking. For example, a song I have a lot of nostalgia for is the Backstreet Boys' I Want It That Way. It has a lot of personal significance to me. When I hear it, I think of driving through the streets of Los Santos in GTA Online with my best friends, or when a group of us belted it out on a public street on a Greek island on our last week of school. So when I hear the song, it instantly brings up feelings. Sometimes the song features in a film that's actually good and makes it even better, and sometimes it features in a trashy film, but because I like the song so much, it almost makes that movie a little bit more endearing. And like I said, nostalgia is a very powerful weapon in the filmmaker belt. So today we'll be looking at 5 films that use nostalgia in differing ways and to varying success. 4 of which do it very well in my opinion, and 1 which doesn't. I've chosen these 5 very intentionally because I feel they represent very different kinds of nostalgia. The first one is how not to use nostalgia. The second is nostalgia for films. The third being nostalgia for a location or a time period. The fourth is nostalgia used as a means of subversion. And the fifth is a combination of 2 to 4. So without further ado, let's get into film number 1. I mean, what else would it be? You could make the argument that both Dumbo and Aladdin are up for this position as well, but I think that those two, at the very least, introduce 1 or 2 new things to those stories. At least they try to do some things different, whereas The Lion King, what the fuck? This film is the definition of the meme, hey mate, can I borrow your homework? Yeah, sure, but don't make it too obvious. Because it's just nothing but a lifeless photocopy of the original, which puts us in a very weird position. On one hand, it is The Lion King, so there is an inherent charm that comes with the film, but it's almost as if they try to take as much of that charm out as possible. Because unlike the original, there are no colors, there's no excitement, there's no energy, no green flames and armies of hyena and be prepared, and Can You Feel the Love Tonight takes place during the day. What I find so wrong about this movie is that it makes these really ridiculously dumb and lifeless changes, and it expects that the audience will just eat up the rest of the film that is basically the same thing churned out twice, and that is just not the case. The great thing about nostalgia is when paired with something new, that contrast is very powerful. What makes it so effective is showing us something we're familiar with, and then taking it in new directions, or introducing us to a new character or a new setting, and taking us on a journey that will allow us to see how these new things connect to the past, and the effect that they have on each other. Something film number 2 does beautifully. Now yes, when it comes to movies paying homage to their predecessors, Endgame is kind of the obvious pick, but there are already like 100 videos on Endgame, and I think Dr. Sleep does just as good a job, if not better. In fact, from here on out, feel free to put films from this year that you think fit into these categories, because the ones that I'm using as an example are far from the only ones that could be used. But yes, I think Dr. Sleep utilizes our knowledge and love of The Shining as a means of elevating our enjoyment and appreciation for the film, and if you haven't seen The Shining, I do still feel that it does a very good job of standing on its own. It tells a compelling story with vibrant new characters and a style of direction from master of horror Mike Flanagan that has tastes of Kubrick, King, and Flanagan himself. That is hard to pull off. But the reason I picked this film is because of its third act. Now, many have had issue with the third act, saying it's nothing but nostalgia and fan service. And I think that if you watch this film carefully enough, you'll notice that the amount of foreshadowing and setup done is far more than sufficient. When they get to that hotel, everything becomes rooted in story, characters, and their emotional connections. Everything that happens has been previously set up, and the fact that it takes place at one of the most iconic locations in film history is more than necessary to the arc of Dan Torrance, and also a perfect cherry on top to the darkly delicious sundae that is Dr. Sleep. The alternate choice here would be Ford v Ferrari, but The Last Black Man in San Francisco is a film that I think from its visual language and subject matter pays homage to a bygone era and a city that is clearly so incredibly important to the writer-director.
You don't get to hate San Francisco.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, dude, I mean, sorry, but I'll hate what I want.
Do you love it?
I mean, yeah, I'm here, but do I have to love it?
You don't get to hate it unless you love it.
The music and cinematography here feel anything but modern, and it creates an almost fantastical environment where you just feel like anything can happen. You feel the warmth, love, and passion on every frame, and the way that the protagonist talks about his city is simply beautiful. Very similar to the way Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby talk about racing in Ford v Ferrari. When it comes to love letters to a certain time period or a place, one of the most important ingredients really is love. And I'm sure we've all seen at least a dozen food videos on YouTube where they ask the secret ingredient and the chef, doesn't want to give it away, so they say love. But in the case of The Last Black Man in San Francisco, it's actually true. Alternate pick here would be Joker. Now, there is just so much to love about The Irishman, from the masterful use of VFX, Rodrigo Prieto's stunning photography, and the fact that Thelma Schoonmaker edited the shit out of this 3.5-hour film. And its use of In the Still of the Night throughout the film is one of the best uses of song repetition since California Dreaming in Chungking Express. But because we're talking about nostalgia today, I want to talk about how The Irishman uses our preconceived notions of the gangster genre, along with Martin Scorsese and his relationship with the genre, as a means of subverting our expectations, in the same way that Todd Phillips used mainstream audiences' knowledge of superhero movies to sneak in a character study. When we watch a Scorsese gangster flick, we go in expecting certain things to happen. Big violent murders and accompanying voiceover, few moments in which the protagonist realizes that this may not be for him. But The Irishman takes these things and turns them completely on their head. Pretty much every single time a character dies, even the biggest death in the film, which I won't spoil, it is shot and performed with very little to no remorse. The music doesn't swell, blood doesn't come pouring out in a gruesome manner, and there's certainly none of this fancy frame rate work. It's simple and to the point, hard-hitting on an emotional level. The voiceover, instead of having it be flashy and witty, Steven Zaillian writes it in a way that makes it essential to the story but also reserved. He connects it to the overall structure of the film, with old-age De Niro being the one looking back on things with both nostalgia and dread. And when it comes to moments that show the evil of the profession, well, that's basically the last 40 minutes of the film. It's just that. And in these last 40 minutes, Scorsese is basically portraying Frank Sheeran, as Ken Watanabe says in Inception,
old man, filled with regret, waiting to die alone.
Get the fuck out of here, Tommy.
You motherfucker! I almost had him! You stuttering prick, yeah! Fuck me! Fuck me, you motherfucker! Fuck my mother! That's what you fucking tell me! Huh? Motherfucker, you, huh? Oh, God.
So what I'm trying to say is, when a lot of us go into The Irishman, we're expecting a certain kind of gangster film and a certain kind of nostalgia from Scorsese. But what we get is actually nostalgia that is weaponized against us in all the best ways, and it is just masterful. Now, I'm not saying the last film is by any means the best, but when it comes to its utilization of nostalgia, it combines all the great qualities of the last three. And yeah, it was in the thumbnail, so of course it's... I mean, of course it would be. Does Once Upon a Time in Hollywood pay homage to films that came before it with a playful sense of progression? Hell yes. Is it a love letter to a bygone era and a city that many of us have never actually experienced? Well, I'll let Mr. Pitt tell you.
Quentin really did make a love letter to the city of Los Angeles and to that period, our industry and the people who came before us that allow us to do what we do. So it's pretty special.
And does it use our preconceived knowledge of Quentin Tarantino as a filmmaker, along with 1960s and 70s Hollywood, as a means of saying something new? Well, it literally changes history. So that is an astounding yes. It certainly is one of the most nostalgic films of the year, and maybe of the decade. Which brings me to ask the question, why has 2019 been such a nostalgic year? Is it just a coincidence? Personally, I think not. We're nearing the end of the year, and still have period pieces 1917 and Little Women. Knives Out is a modern take on an Agatha Christie whodunit, and the Rise of Skywalker's trailer alone has led to many saying it's nothing but a nostalgia fest. And in my opinion, the answer is simple. 2019 is the last year of this decade. And of course, we're all looking forward to the new one, but I know that I'm not the only one when I say that we're also taking a look back, embracing the future without forgetting or respecting the past. It's important, and I think that the films of 2019 have done a brilliant job at that. In fact, the idea that this decade is coming to an end has hit me so hard that not only will you guys be getting the annual end-of-year mashup, I'll also be doing an end-of-decade mashup, which will release around the end of December along with my end-of-year list. So please do keep an eye out for that. But that's it from me today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.